Hi, folks, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about critters or anything, I guess, but anything where humans with superior knowledge, resources, capacity, intercede on behalf of critters or whatever, people in less fortunate circumstances. And we say to ourselves, well, we're helping, we're doing good, we're virtuous, but are we really creating, we solve one problem but create two? Are we really helping? I'm going to start off with summer is starting to roll to an end here in Australia, and already you can see the signs that the critters are trying to bulk up before the winter. It's in their genes to do this. And the winter here, although the winters aren't brutal in Australia, there's no snow, for example, the animals here, nonetheless, their food resources diminish considerably. And, the older and sick animals die, and, all this sort of stuff. Now, that's the natural order of things. It seems cruel and heartless and so on, but it is the natural order of things. But nonetheless, my wife and I, we back onto a national park, so we have a huge oversupply of critters in the backyard. So now we come across injured critters of all types, and we feel strongly about this. We want to try and help them. We hope that the help will get them over their injuries, which we hope will be temporary or whatever handicap they have, and they'll be independent and okay. Now, the reality is that the majority of the ones we help, we make sure we feed them and we protect them from other critters that are trying to shoulder charge them out the way and make sure they have a good diet and they recover from their injuries and so on. Now, they would surely die without our help. Whether they would die, for example, a critter with a badly injured foot came along and it was close to death, we could tell. And the decision, well, do we leave it to die? Because that's it's got injured. That's the natural order of things. That's kind of how it happens out in the wild. Or do we intercede to look after it? And we're, my wife and I were hopeless. We went down like a sack of shit, and we gushed and went to help the critter. So, and it took quite a bit of help actually. We had to sort of research diet that would get it back to health, and then we had to ride shotgun while we were feeding it so that other critters didn't try and take the food or bash it up or something like that. So, and eventually it came, but the foot never properly healed. It did to some extent, but it never properly healed. So the critter bulked up and it was healthy again, but it still couldn't compete for food. Even in the super bountiful circumstances of the spring and early summer, it could manage because there's so much food around. But if once the food supply tightened up a little bit, it couldn't compete. And we've seen it sort of in the forest there, getting bashed up by the others and so on. So we thought, okay, what do we do? Now, without our help, that over winter, that critter's going to die. I mean, it won't make it. And in its attempt to sort of get food, I would suspect it'll re-injure its foot. Because the health of the foot's a little precarious as far as we can tell. Do we grab it and take it to the vet because it's a protected species, this one? So we tend to consider, if it's not a protected species, we tend to let nature run its course. But if it is a protected species, then we do feel inclined to intercede. But we've got now quite a few critters, different sorts of critters, that never fully healed. They never fully recovered from their injury or whatever it was. And so they're now dependent on us, or becoming again, over the height of spring and summer, they did all right. But I can already see their fur or their, is looking a bit ragged, and already their diet is not as good as it needs to be. which means we have to then sort of step into the void and artificially protect them, and feed them and all that sort of stuff. And it's not simply the feeding; it's the riding shotgun. It's standing guard while they have a meal, because if we don't, the other critters will just take the food and. But having a look at this, we say, okay, well, all of these critters will die without us. But that is the natural course of events. They're simply not fit and healthy enough to cut it out there in the brutal world of nature. So what do we do? Now we're looking at, in August, maybe September or, late August and September, looking at taking a vacation. And we'll probably be away for 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. And that's still sort of the end of winter, and there won't be it's too early for the very first shoots of spring. And so we've sort of considered that really all those critters are going to die while we're gone. Some of them may hang on for that time but that's it. So we're thinking of them dying and going hungry, and it's, again we're sort of, it's something that concerns us. But do we what do we do about it? Now, should we have interceded in the first place? Because we've now created the problem. Did we create that problem? Because if we'd allow the natural course of events to run their course, then all these critters would be dead, and it wouldn't be something we needed to worry about because they wouldn't be around. But by interceding, we've created a problem that otherwise wouldn't have existed. Now, while we're away, they may die a sort of painful, horrible starvation type death, and this sort of thing. And is that would that have happened? Because when they came to us, they were already on their last legs. They probably would have died in a few days anyway. But we've now prolonged and elongated their life, but they never recovered full health, and thus they're still dependent on us. Was that a mistake? We don't know. I'm not sure we could have stood by and allowed it to happen. But again, these are only protected species. But nonetheless, the natural course of events meant they would have died pretty quickly. But we in a couple of cases, one critter, the one with the injured foot. I think we got to it just in time. Another day or two, and it would have gone. So, but anyway, that's the sort of situation. Now, if we look at this in a wider, the wider angle, and this is rather crude and brutal, but stay with me on this. From the time that modern medicine came to third world countries, and particularly say from the 1930s onwards, particularly from that time, maybe even a little bit earlier, but around that time. Now, it wasn't unusual for people in third world countries to have 7 or 8 children, more per woman. This was quite a normal sort of gig, and that they would have each child would be with a different man. Now, in the native sort of perspective of the world, this gives your genes a wider spread. So given the genes mix and the fact that records aren't kept of cousins and so on, the idea is you've got a much wider spread of genes in a society that's far from being monogamous, and that does permit cousin marriage or cousin procreation, or doesn't even care about it one way or another. I mean, who gives a shit? Now, the only way you can sort of determine your line of succession, if you will, is through the woman, because there's no monogamous relationships. Therefore, only the woman knows her own children. So you find with Islander type cultures and others that it's the line of succession and inheritance is actually through the woman, not through the man. Again, due to lack of monogamous relationships. Now, so 8 plus children per woman was quite normal as an average, but the death rate was incredible. So there was 30-40% death rate within the first year. I mean, either at birth or within the first year. Famines were just a regular feature. So really not the survival rate of the people in those places, the third world countries, could be Africa or elsewhere. The survival rate was actually quite low. So the population, in the overall scheme of things, given the rate of births, the population was actually quite stable. It didn't seem to really fluctuate that much. The minute there was any affluence, the birth rate would boom. The minute there was, famine or disease or something which was a permanent feature, then that kind of leveled out the massive birth rate, so that the population stayed within a range reasonably constant. And they always had a surplus, and you can see that from the huge slave trade that they did, whether it be with the Arabs or slave trading amongst themselves, or indeed to the Europeans from the 1500s onwards. Now, when white people came along, particularly the Christian missionary type, we're going to spread God and goodness in the world and this sort of stuff. They saw this disease, this pestilence, this incredible death rates, which were a normal feature and had been for thousands of years. They saw it and they said, well, this is terrible. God doesn't want this. And middle-class households, because they're middle-class people, are going around doing it. Middle-class Western people, this is terrible. This would never be tolerated in our Western middle-class, first world, advanced industrial. But you're not in an advanced industry. You're in a place that has never the fucking wheel, for goodness sakes. So Western medicine came in thousands of years technologically ahead of that society. Western medicine came in, and suddenly the population boomed. The death rate, infant death mortality rate, was sharply reduced. So, but the procreation rate didn't adjust itself accordingly, and so there was this massive population boom, which continues to this very day, will continue for decades to come. So there's now hundreds upon hundreds of millions of Africans or people in third world countries that have increased and added to, and are very much a central part of the misery of those nations and their existence and their constant wars, their famines, their death rates, the lifestyle where there are hundreds of millions of people eking out a meager existence as subsistence farmers, and the minute there's a bit of a flood or this or that, then they die like fucking flies. So the problems being so, in the desire to help and do good, it's created nothing but problems, which now the West is having to wrestle with. There's all these hundreds of millions of people. Where do they want to go? They want to come to the rich West. The streets are paved with gold. They give you free everything if you go, that sort of thing. And again, they're IQ 70 illiterate peasants. They don't understand what's going on, or understand that. They just think the supply of gold is infinite, as they would, as they do in, like, they cut down all the trees in the area for firewood, and then wonder why there's nothing growing on the trees that they would otherwise eat. While the animals that would have come to graze on the trees are no longer there. And so they've got no concept of tomorrow. And so this idea of interceding to help, but creating problems, many more problems, that's something that I often think about and ponder on. And whereas, the missionaries going to Africa, watching hundreds of newborn babies die of starvation or something, that it must have been a tough gig. And very difficult to do. I want to do something about this. I want to make the bad things stop. If only the bad things would stop, then only good things would be behind. But is that really how it works? Is that really how it works in the overall scheme of things? You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.